The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Hi, everybody. This is Jason Rosenbaum, political correspondent with St. Louis Public Radio. Congressman Sam Graves recently took the helm of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and the Republican from Tarkio says the move could be beneficial to the sprawling 6th Congressional District and the state at large. Graves spoke with me earlier this week about his goals as chairman and how he plans to navigate a divided Congress. Here's my conversation with Congressman Sam Graves. So I think that a big question for a lot of Missourians is how will their lives improve, or what will they see by virtue of you being chairman of the Transportation Committee?
Well, I mean, we have jurisdiction over every mode of transportation out there, whether that's, roads and bridges, highways, pipelines, rail, inland or waterways, ports, aviation, you name it, every mode of transportation out there. So obviously it's going to give the district and the state of Missouri more influence when it comes to grants and dollars for those different projects, whether that's through the WRDA bill, which is the Water Resources Bill, deals with sewer systems in our communities, drinking water systems. It deals with our locks and dams on the Mississippi. It deals with how the Missouri River is being managed, or straight up like the FAA reauthorization we're going to be doing, which deals with aviation and our airports and the money that our airports are able to receive, or when we do pipeline safety and the pipelines that come through the state of Missouri. So I'm going to be working with the administration, the governor's office, obviously, and the legislature to do everything we can to maximize those dollars coming back to the state.
I'm glad you mentioned the governor's office. I know that when you ran for Congress in the 2000s, you wanted to get as far away from Jefferson City as humanly possible. But the governor announced in his State of the State speech that he wants to devote $900 million to widen parts of I-70. And I think an obvious question for people like me is, could there be some federal help to push this project beyond Kansas City, Columbia, and St. Louis? I'd be interested in your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the governor called me almost a month ago now to visit with me about that project. And he had mentioned that he was going to put that in his state of the state address. And I'm absolutely going to do everything I can. And the interstate system is obviously the federal system. It's the federal network. There's a lot of federal dollars that go into that. There's a lot of grant dollars, and there's also a lot of matching dollars. So we're in the process right now of looking into every avenue we can possibly find to be able to find dollars to make I-70 more safe, to add those lanes. We all know how busy I-70 can get. If you're traveling back and forth between Kansas City or St. Louis, or going to Columbia, to the University of Missouri, whatever the case may be. And then all that traffic that's not going across the country, funnels right through I-70. And so we want to make it safe. And we've been talking about widening I-70 for years in the state of Missouri. And it looks like the governor is really getting behind it. And he's obviously putting money, where it needs to be.
One of the things I noticed on social media when that was announced was there were some people, primarily on the left, who were like, $900 million for a highway? That seems kind of like a misplaced priority compared to doing like public transit or something like that. And I would imagine you hear some of that discourse on the Transportation Committee from some of your Democratic colleagues where they want to prioritize things like money for public transit rather than highways. What's kind of going to be your philosophy as chairman when that discourse comes to bear in your committee?
Well, you've got two different silos. You've got mass transit, public transit dollars, and that's what they go towards. And then you got highway dollars and dollars specifically earmarked for the interstate system. And so, those are two completely different silos, and that's just part of the process. Traveling across this country or using I-70 or using I-80 or whatever the big interstates are that go from east to west. those are heavy priorities for both, not only for just people, but for everything that moves, all the products that move. And eventually it may go by train or it may go by plane, but sooner or later it's got to go by truck. It's got to get to the end user by a truck, and that's down our highways. And we want to make sure that those are as safe as they can be. So there's different dollars, there's different silos of dollars, and to be quite honest with you, public transit gets a lot of money from the federal government, and we need to make sure that we have other priorities as well.
So I was obviously watching the speaker's election with great interest, not only because it was kind of unusual, but because one of the subplots was that a number of members of your caucus want to reduce federal governmental spending, which I'm sure you share philosophically. But I think that the obvious follow-up question is, what sort of spending do you reduce? And if, like, some members of your caucus want to reduce transportation spending writ large, what is going to be the reaction from you and the other Republican members of your committee?
Well, the thing about transportation is we still have true trust funds in transportation, whether that's the Highway Trust Fund, we've got the Inland Waterways Trust Fund, we got the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, we got the Aviation Trust Fund. Those are all trust funds that are funded through user fees. And those dollars are specifically to go to, for instance, the Highway Trust Fund is to fund our surface transportation reauthorization that we do every 4 to 5 years. The problem we get into is, for instance, with the infrastructure bill that the president rammed through, it didn't stay within the bookmarks of what those dollars are. It went way outside, and we're borrowing money from general revenue. And so if that's the case, or people are talking about, we do need to get back inside our means. Pay as you go. It's always been that way in transportation. It's always funded itself. And again, it's a user fee. It's a user fee program. So we've got to start staying within the bounds. So we went from, normally we spend on a highway trust fund somewhere around $300 to $400 billion on a reauthorization. And what this did was, it not only did that, but it went way beyond to $1.2 trillion, and it threw everything in there. It isn't just highways anymore. Now it's you name it. They've got money in there, and it's not paid for. That's the problem. They've got money in there for everything. So we need to go back to what we have always done under transportation, and quit borrowing so much money and putting that burden on the backs of our children.
I guess the issue is, if you wanted to keep the amount of money but have it paid for, you would have to raise user fees. You would have to raise things like gas and diesel taxes, which I'm sure a lot of people don't really want right now with gas prices really high. So how do you maneuver through this desire to make sure everything is paid for without making it too burdensome for everyday consumers, but also like truck drivers that depend on fuel prices being stable in order to make a living?
Well, the biggest problem we have right now isn't what the rate of the user fees are. It's that we have so many vehicles on the road that aren't paying for it. Electric vehicles, any alternative fuel vehicle, for instance, whether it's propane vehicles, or what we're looking at now, one of the new technologies, hydrogen. But those vehicles are not paying for the use of the road. And we need to be recovering those dollars, because those vehicles, whether it's a truck, an electric truck, for instance, or an electric car or whatever, they are not paying for the use of that road. And so we're losing a lot of revenue through that. So we have to make sure that everybody is paying their share in terms of the use of those roads. And so that's where we're going to concentrate first.
I think every question that a Republican House committee chairman is going to be asked over the next 2 years is, how are you going to be able to advance your principles when the Democrats control the Senate and the White House, and you have a fairly narrow House majority? But I think the interesting thing is, transportation does seem to have some bipartisan agreement on a lot of things. You saw that with the infrastructure bill. You see that in Jefferson City. Is this one area where you think that maybe some of the divided Congress could end up transcended, or do you still see disagreements between the two parties on this general policy area?
A lot of that depends on the issue itself, but the Transportation Committee in the House, at least, has always, for lack of a better word, traditionally been a very bipartisan committee. So and to be honest with you too, the infrastructure bill that the Democrats passed out of the House was extraordinarily partisan. In fact, there was no input in there from Republicans, which ultimately, once it went to the Senate, they just dropped it. And they just worked on their bill. And then the House was voted on the Senate version with no House input whatsoever because it was so partisan. We will go back, and I have, that's one of my absolute goals, is to go back to that bipartisan tradition. We work with other members, and we're going to be a work committee. We're not going to be a show committee. We're not going to be, we're not going to have all the cameras in there and doing all of the fanfare like oversight or judiciary is going to be doing. We're going to have to be putting our, we're going to have to get these reauthorizations done. And you do that by, you have a better product when you work with both sides, when you ask for that input, give me your ideas. Let's come to a compromise. Let's figure out what the middle ground is. Let's find out where we agree first, and we start working on the little bit harder stuff, and then we work on the hardest stuff. And I learned that when I was chairman of small business. We put together a reauthorization of a program called the SBIR, the Small Business Innovative Research Program, which had not been renewed in over a decade. And I worked with Mary Landrieu at the time. That was when the Republicans controlled the House, Democrats controlled the Senate, and she was the chairman, my counterpart in the Senate. We got together. We got the easy stuff out of the way first, and then we worked on the harder stuff. And then I think it came down to about 4 programs in the end that we finally found an agreement on. We got the program renewed, and now it's going on to help small businesses all over the country. So that's how you get things done, is you just work with people and get that input, get those ideas out there.
What's your relationship like with Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, and how do you think he's been doing so far?
We talked quite a little bit. He's very accessible. For instance, when we had the meltdown with the NOTAM issue, and we had to shut down flights for 2 hours here in the United States, I actually got a call from the secretary about 7 o'clock in the morning explaining to me what was going on. Then he called me back about an hour and a half later to give me an update of what was going on. So he's very accessible, very approachable, easy to talk to. So he's been very good from that standpoint as far as secretary goes.
And my last question for you, have you talked with President Biden about what his transportation and infrastructure priorities are for the next couple of years? And what do you foresee your ability to work with him, given that we're about to enter a very highly politically charged environment with the presidential election and the aforementioned divided Congress?
I have not talked to the president yet on what his priorities are for transportation. That'll probably come here in another month or two. We are going to be doing oversight on the dollars that are going out in the infrastructure bill. When you're pushing $1.2 trillion out as fast as the administration is trying to push it out, there's potential for a lot of waste and abuse in that process. So we're going to be doing a lot of oversight to make sure that the dollars are going where they're supposed to go, and that agencies aren't rewriting the law through their rulemaking authority. So I'm sure I'll be talking to the president about that too, our oversight objectives and what we're looking to do in the at least on the House transportation side, and I'm sure that'll come.
For more political coverage, go to stlpr.org. I'm Jason Rosenbaum, and thank you for listening to this conversation with Congressman Sam Graves.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.